2 years ago, my family and I visited some friends of ours who live and work in Turkey with Syrian refugees. About a year and a half ago, ISIS detonated a suicide bomb in Istanbul, killing 11 people. The explosion was directly on the route our friend Matt takes to work every morning, and thankfully he wasn't injured. But hearing this made me realize how unstable the situation is and the danger they face in Turkey. Initially, my interest in the Syrian refugee crisis was prompted by a number of stories I'd been reading on the Humans of New York website. I was gripped by these personal stories of children drowning, families being torn apart, and homes reduced to rubble. And I started to wonder what that meant for me, as a 14-year-old girl living a happy and comfortable life in Mamaroneck, New York. I was struggling to reconcile how there could be such upheaval on the other side of the world while life in New York was nothing out of the ordinary. I hope that after this talk, you'll have a better understanding of the crisis and its effect on Syria and its people. And whether it's the economic, policy, or moral arguments you'll hear tonight, my deep desire is that you'll be inspired to take action. Turning this crisis around starts with us, as individuals, as communities, and as a nation. Syria's civil unrest began almost 6 years ago in March of 2011. Peaceful protests demanding democratic reforms were met with violent responses from the government. Opposition groups began to form, and although they were all fighting to overthrow the same group of people, they were divided along the lines of race, religion, geography, and secularism. According to BBC, over half of Syria's population of 22 million people has been displaced by the civil war. That means 11 million people are on the move. 6 million people are still in Syria, and 5 million have become refugees. Of these refugees, half are children. So why is this a crisis, and why should we care? Well, 470,000 Syrians have died because of this violent war. That's equivalent to 1 year of experiencing a 9/11 attack every other day. The movements of people from Syria, combined with refugees from Afghanistan and Iraq, has resulted in the world's worst refugee crisis since World War II. Even after hearing statistics like these, it's impossible for me to imagine the heartbreak, tragedy, and loss Syrians have to deal with every day. The United Nations recently released a report that detailed the cost to children of this violent war. It stated that 84 schools were attacked in 2016 alone. One of the teachers at these targeted schools described his experience. He said, "On a clear morning, warplanes attacked a school compound while class was still in session. They kept bombing while children and teachers tried to flee." Witnesses to this horrific assault described the scene as bodies being littered on the floor and school books mixed with blood. Since over half of the refugees are children, it's children who are being affected by the poverty, disease, malnutrition, and exploitation accompanying their exodus. People in wartime situations leave quickly, with few possessions and little money. As their homes are reduced to rubble, they become desperate for food, water, and medicine. In addition, the average price for one seat on a transit boat costs about $1,500 US. And once refugees get to the new country they're attempting to go to, they have no legal way to make money. This puts them in a position to easily be abused, oppressed, and taken advantage of. I'm going to tell you about a Jordanian woman who brokers marriages between young Syrian girls and older Muslim men. Now, the men come looking for 12-year-old Syrian brides whom they often abandon within days or weeks of the ceremony. No longer virgins, the girls are then resold at a lower price to the next bidder in what has become a sanctioned prostitution business arrangement. A woman who arranged marriages for her 2 daughters said, "As a single mother, I cannot support them. I cannot feed them. I wanted to make sure they were okay." Imagine being a single mother and watching your 2 daughters starve to death. sometimes the solution isn't pretty. In this case, when it comes to starvation versus sexual exploitation for their children, many parents choose the latter. But what if we could respond to these horrific situations and urgent needs with compassion and hope, knowing that 100 years later, it could be our country torn apart by civil war, our schools targeted, our hospitals hit by airstrikes, our homes bombed, and our children orphaned? And what if Europe, an ocean away, looked at us and demurred, citing innumerable reasons not to help us? Though I feel it's our obligation as people to address the problems caused by this mass migration, it won't be easy. There's a fear that terrorists will come into countries under refugee visas. Germany has experienced several attacks by people who came into the country as refugees. And this plays into the mistaken notion that all refugees are terrorists. This is simply not the case. Another fear is that refugees will take jobs away from citizens of the host country. But in reality, refugees often take jobs in domestic and agricultural fields, which citizens are unwilling to take. Therefore, accepting refugees would not increase unemployment among citizens. The opposite would actually be more likely to occur. It would boost the economy by filling more domestic jobs and creating an increase in purchased consumer goods. An article by John Cassidy stated that in 2015, the Turkish economy grew by 3%, and Libya's economy grew by 2% in the same year. Far from siphoning resources away from these countries, accepting refugees contributed to their overall economic growth. So, what can I and others in the US do to address this crisis? Well, some might say, this is not our responsibility. We have no obligation to citizens of another country. And to that point, I respectfully but firmly disagree. Our country was founded on the notion that everyone should have a safe place to build their lives and practice their religion. Ever since the War Refugee Board in World War II, the U.S. standard has been to admit those who have a well-founded fear of persecution. We upheld this notion when we signed the 1967 Protocol on Refugees, which defines refugee as a person fleeing persecution and gives them a right not to be sent back to danger. Syrians definitely meet this criteria. They're fleeing chemical violence, conscription into local militias, government violence, and oppression by ISIS. On a national level, there should be legislation devoting resources and supporting efforts to resettle and integrate Syrian refugees. Obama's goal of accepting 10,000 refugees was met in September of 2016. And although some feel this is an embarrassingly low number, for a country of our size and wealth, others feel this number is too high. To that end, our current president, Donald Trump, is taking extreme orders to restrict and limit immigration from Middle Eastern countries via executive orders. No matter the number of refugees the U.S. accepts, we can at least support organizations like the United Nations and World Food Program that are on the front lines meeting the felt needs of refugees. If I was walking along the Long Island Sound and I saw someone in the water drowning, waving their arms above their head and calling for help, I would do everything I could to save them. Wouldn't you? I'd like to share a story of someone who did just that. In November of 2015, Oscar Camps and a friend, 2 lifeguards from Spain, went to the coast of Greece to see what they could do for the thousands of refugees drowning off the shore. Now you have to understand, for refugees, this trip to a new country via boat is not a fun experience. I mean, they're crammed on these tiny, very dirty lifeboats that do not have the capacity to hold this number of people. And in addition to that, the boats aren't filled up with enough gas to get them to the place they're trying to go to. And therefore, these boats are often left in the middle of the ocean, and the refugees can't swim, so they sink. They drown along with the boat. Within 2 hours of arriving at the coast of Greece, the men had stripped off their shirts, thrown on their swim fins, and dove into the water to save refugees from a sinking boat. This sparked the men to create a group called Proactiva, which goes out and donated boats along the coasts of Greece and Lesbos to rescue refugees at sea. In one day alone, Proactiva rescued over 700 people. When I think of active and solution, I think of this. One of the volunteer lifeguards said, "They are drowning, and I know what to do. I know how to save them. Wouldn't you do the same?" This is a question we all must ask ourselves. I'm also impressed by a few examples of ways people help that are closer to home. Some women in New Jersey organized dinners where refugees cooked and people could pay $50 to attend. For the cooks, it was a way to meet new people, make money, and connect to those in their communities, while the attendees got to learn about new cultures and form relationships with people they normally wouldn't know. Notably, the organizers are members of a synagogue who's leading efforts to acclimate refugees in New Jersey. These are just two examples of ways people helped. As a 14-year-old girl living in Mamaroneck, there's a lot to do. I'm part of an organization called Hearts and Homes for Refugees, which is working closely to support and help refugees who have been screened and vetted by the U.S. Department of State to live in America. We help provide clothing, household goods, and furniture for these refugee families, along with tutoring their kids to prepare them for school and helping them navigate the public transportation system. My friend and I also raised $700 for International Rescue Committee by doing a bake sale, while my other friends spent Martin Luther King Day organizing and sorting supplies to be sent to refugees in Iraq. Other things you and I can do include donating to organizations that provide humanitarian aid in Syria and other countries, and writing to your legislator or senator urging them to support refugee resettlement efforts. Now, you may be thinking, it's all well and good that we should help refugees, but how does that benefit us? What do we gain by helping Syrian refugees? Well, on a national level, we maintain our integrity by upholding our promise to help those seeking asylum. And our country, which was founded on immigrants, grows stronger by incorporating their ideas, drive, and differences into the fabric of our nation. On a community level, we build bridges and break down barriers between differences in race, religion, background, and culture. On an individual level, we understand and empathize with those fleeing desperate circumstances. And it is as individuals that hundreds of thousands of people in Los Angeles, Seattle, Chicago, New York, and right up to the White House doorstep have raised their voices protesting President Trump's immigration ban. Americans across the United States have made it clear that we will be a country that accepts, welcomes, and gives immigrants hope. Whether it's taking to the streets, writing to your local legislator, opening your home for a meal, or even teaching one child English, individuals have made it clear that we will fight to reclaim our national identity as a country where refugees are welcomed. I plan to be one of those voices. I hope you will too.